Over the last year or so, ever since we passed the 5 to 6 year typical life cycle for a Nintendo system on the Switch, when we see a new major Nintendo announcement, I think to myself, wow, the Nintendo Switch is the best system of all time. When they showed off Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I was impressed. When they showed off Splatoon 3, I was impressed. When we got the latest trailer for Tears of the Kingdom, I was like, my gosh, we're really getting this epic this late into the system's life cycle. When they revealed Metroid Prime Remastered, I was just beyond floored. And every time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, wow, this is the best system ever. We are still getting so many incredible games this late into the system's life cycle. And I bring this up because today we're talking about backwards compatibility on the next Nintendo system. If you don't know what backwards compatibility is, for example, the 3DS after the DS, we were still able to take our DS games and put it into our 3DS and play them. That entire DS library we had on the 3DS, and that definitely gave us a lot more games to play and enjoy. So this idea of backwards compatibility is extremely important when it comes to the Nintendo Switch, when we consider just how many amazing games are on Switch and how many people have Switch and how many of those people are playing games on Switch. It's more than any previous system. There's just so much value there. So with Nintendo's next system, whatever it is, whenever it comes, backwards compatibility is perhaps more important than ever. Which brings us to the point of this video. Has Nintendo been hinting at backwards compatibility? I think so. And that's what we're talking about today.
Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we're talking about potentially backwards compatibility on the next Nintendo Switch system, the successor, the Nintendo Switch 2. And we're going to be taking a look at some news that's come up in the last few months, including the recent interview with Doug Bowser, and going over how Nintendo may have actually been hinting at backwards compatibility this entire time. But before we do, I want to mention our goal to reach 25,000 subscribers by May 12th, the release for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It's a tall task, but I think we are gaining some ground here, and if you enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, because then we might just have a chance at hitting that goal. But let's now get into the meat and potatoes of this discussion video. So the interview that we've been talking about the last few days that was with Doug Bowser, we've been focusing on the Tears of the Kingdom stuff. But there is also something about Nintendo Switch 2, and some people took these comments to suggest that the Nintendo Switch 2 is not coming anytime soon, which I think is definitely a misinterpretation. But let's go ahead and read it over, and I'll be getting into why this means backwards compatibility is likely. So the Associated Press asked Doug Bowser, when is the next Switch coming out? What kinds of features or new capabilities would you like to see? Doug answers, as we enter the 7th year for Nintendo Switch, sales are still strong. I think we still have a very strong lineup coming. As Mr. Furukawa said recently, we're entering uncharted territory with the platform. It's exciting to see that demand is still there. So nothing to announce on any future console or device, but we are still feeling very bullish about Nintendo Switch. I should be very careful about what I personally would like to see, but what I can share is that one of the reasons that even going into year 7 we feel very confident that Switch can have a strong performance over the next few years is that it's still truly that unique device that you can play in a variety of ways at home, on the go. One of the things we look at always is how we can surprise and delight. How we can introduce new, unique ways of playing, that's always in front of our mind. So let's first address this whole point about not even talking about Switch 2. This interview is not the place where Nintendo's going to be making grandiose announcements. When these announcements happen, it's in a official capacity at some sort of calculated planned event ahead of time. But I do think there's a couple things here that do hint at what's to come. So firstly, Doug Bowser brings up how we are entering the 7th year of Nintendo Switch. And this is an incredibly important point to consider here, because what you have to know is that every previous Nintendo system has not lasted this long unless you count the original Famicom and the original Game Boy, the first Nintendo systems. The Famicom came out in 1983, and its follow-up, the Super Famicom, came out in 1990, a 7-year gap. And the Game Boy had a 9-year gap. But those were decades ago, a very, very different time. Point is, we're already talking about how the Switch is in a different situation compared to most other Nintendo systems. We've never been this late before with this much momentum, as Doug Bowser points out. But he also says, I think we still have a very, very strong lineup coming. He says very twice, and strong. That's a lot of adjectives to say a lineup is coming when there's nothing slated beyond July of this year. So where is that lineup? But then he also says, we feel very confident that the Switch can have a strong performance over the next few years. So few means at least 2, potentially more. And I think this is also something very important to focus on here, because this kind of goes hand in hand with some people have made arguments about with how the Switch is meant to have a 10-year cycle. This is something I've been seeing a lot of people bring up, saying the Switch is supposed to have a 10-year cycle. That's why we're not going to see a Nintendo Switch 2 until like 2026 or 2027. But that's not entirely true. Once upon a time, Nintendo did tell us that they plan to support Switch for 7 to 10 years. Supporting Switch does not mean supporting Switch as your only system out on the market for 7 to 10 years. It just means supporting it. Technically, at the beginning of Switch, they were also supporting the 3DS for a couple years. Nintendo was still releasing published games into 2019, 2 years into the Switch's life cycle. The implication there being that even if Switch is supported for 10 whole years, that they could introduce a new system into year 7, 8, or 9 and still support Switch at the same time. Which is probably what they're going to do, because that's usually how it's done. Whenever one system comes out, there are still some games being published on the older system as well. Of course, in more recent times, it's become more prevalent with longer gaps, especially with the Sony and Microsoft systems, how they have so many cross-generational releases. This is the direction the industry is headed in. So with this all in mind, what it suggests is that while we are in year 7 for Switch, Nintendo is probably going to support Switch for at least 2 years alongside of their next new system before they phase out Switch. And considering how much more successful Switch is than 3DS, I'm gonna guess that it's actually gonna be supported for more than 2 years, which would mean that if we're in year 7 now, and the Switch 2 were to come out tomorrow, they would still support the Switch well into year 9. So I 100% believe, because of how successful the Switch has been, that Nintendo is definitely looking at the later part of years of support. We are going to hit 10 years of Switch support. I 100% believe that. So this goes back to the intro of my video, how we talked about how the Switch has this stellar lineup and we're still getting amazing games this late into the system's life cycle with this much momentum. As Doug Bowser brought up in this interview, there's so much reason to keep these games that we're playing and buying now relevant on the next system. So when Doug Bowser says that they have great momentum with Switch and then they still have a very, very strong lineup to come and that they're going to be pushing Switch for a few more years, what that's implying strongly in my mind is that Switch will be relevant alongside the next system that I do think is coming out really soon. So yes, I think backwards compatibility is highly likely, and we'll be getting to a few other points here, but the reason this is a major point to consider is because there's been a lot of debate lately if backwards compatibility would even come to Nintendo Switch 2. Because recently Modern Vintage Gamer put out a video talking about the challenges of backwards compatibility, and Modern Vintage Gamer doesn't say that backwards compatibility can't be on Nintendo Switch 2, he's simply talking about the number of challenges that there would be. However, I think that it is pretty much guaranteed that we are getting backwards compatibility. Regardless of how challenging it may be, Nintendo pretty much has to make it work with how successful the Switch has been. If they want to transition over and support Switch for a few more years to come, they need to have that library be available on the next system. And we actually have a lot of signs suggesting this beyond this interview. Recently we got that leak that we've talked about in previous videos, so you can check that out. But basically it's been discussed that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet will be getting a graphics enhancement patch, suggesting that while the game may already be playable on the Switch 2, they're going to release a patch to enhance that game. So it's implying that other Switch games will get that same sort of treatment, suggesting that Nintendo already has a plan in mind to keep major Switch games relevant on the next big system. But also, this is not a leak or rumor, by the way. This is 100% real information from a legal court battle regarding the Activision Blizzard Xbox deal. But the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, during their investigation, some details came out about Nintendo's future plans. Nintendo Switch Online has been excluded from our shares as Nintendo's cloud gaming service is very limited. Nintendo's cloud gaming service is only available on the Nintendo Switch device and redacted. So this redacted part is redacting another platform that Nintendo Switch Online is available for. The implication being that, yes, Nintendo has another system that they're working on that's not publicly announced yet that's going to have this service, suggesting Nintendo will be transitioning over their platform, the online service, further strengthening this argument that they really care about a seamless, smooth transition, which makes sense because now we are paying for Nintendo Switch Online, a paid subscription service. Beforehand, this was never the case. Now Nintendo has reason to transition over and make sure there's backwards compatibility with a lot of our digital purchases. So all those games we have on the eShop, the Nintendo Switch Online service, these things seem likely to be available on the next system. And on top of that, we also have this little tidbit from Miyamoto. The development environment has increasingly become more standardized, and we now have an environment that allows players to enjoy older video games on newer consoles more easily than ever before, suggesting that backwards compatibility is more feasible now than it ever has been in the past. So while there may be challenges, and depending on circumstances, it may be very hard for Nintendo to ensure that there will be backwards compatibility, we've seen all sorts of signs suggesting that there will be backwards compatibility on the next big system. Nintendo's going to support Switch for years to come. As we've seen, games will still be coming out for that system, but also as we've seen, the Nintendo Switch Online service will be a part of the Switch and the next system moving forward. And in this day and age, with how Nintendo's handling things, backwards compatibility is more feasible than ever before. And this is great news because all the amazing games I have on Switch that I've been so excited to see will still be relevant on the next system, whether that comes out this year, next year, or beyond. And based off the leaks regarding Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and also how Sony and Microsoft have been treating their systems, it also seems likely that a lot of Switch games are going to be getting enhancements as well. So when we do have Tears of the Kingdom, I wouldn't be surprised if down the road we have a version that's perhaps running at 4K and 60 frames per second, maybe with some ray tracing or something else that makes it look a lot nicer. That would be amazing to see when that day does come. But those are my thoughts on the hints regarding backwards compatibility that we've gotten from Nintendo as of late. What do you guys make of this situation? Do you think the next system will be backwards compatible? Do you even care? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways everyone, this is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.